on Polish politics. So,
Okay.
I was there in 88 and in 89, 90 when the changes were happening. They started in 88. It was the roundtable negotiations began.
Yeah.
And then I was there again in 93. And I went back for a conference in 2019 to Krakow. So I got to see how Krakow has changed since I was there. Have you been to Poland?
Yeah. Every year during summer.
Okay.
Yes.
What part of Poland is your family from?
Silesia, so like.
Oh yeah,
yes,
Śląsk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My family's from Gliwice, which is like close to Katowice.
Yeah. Was that in Wrocław? I was in one city with a big mining area. I think it must have been Wrocław, and it was just incredible. This was back, of course, late 80s when there was so much air pollution, just fog.
Yes.
But okay, so yeah, so you saw my comments, and so I guess in terms of where you might want to use and cite specific more information from the Sabato book to Sabato and O'Connor book to come up to have information used from at least three different chapters, from chapters 1 through 7. And so but as we look through this, it says here also one of the reasons why I put the word limit is because I learned that if there's a word limit, that it makes me learn, because I have to know when I write exactly what is my thought that I'm trying to express, so that I don't waste any words in trying to express it, which means I have to polish and refine my thoughts and focus my thoughts. So that's why the word limit is there. It's also because it's less intimidating to students if they think it's only short paper. So I kind of pointed out where I think I'll send you this again. If we make some more changes, so I'll save it here. In case we make some more changes, so I suggested where we might be able to cut out some extra words that you don't really need. So it says here, two years after the pandemic, U.S. accounts for 1 million total deaths. That's right. I just, where did you get the information? So you want it, whenever you get the information, you should put in the source. And it's not only because you want to give credit to the source, but it's always this focus on trying to persuade the reader. So if you see this was in the New York Times, and of course some sources are more credible than others. Like New York Times is considered a newspaper of record. It's got problems as well, but it's considered to be. So if you I've seen that number. I think it's but if you got the information, please. And you can, of course, I'm not the word limit doesn't include the citations and the footnotes. So if you put in a footnote, I'm not going to, it doesn't count, right? So
it was more kind of like general knowledge. Like I've heard it somewhere.
Yeah,
but I couldn't
remember
I
where.
heard it somewhere during the last 2 years.
But actually, it's a controversial issue because this pandemic has really been for good or bad, horrible or good, an opportunity to expose some assumptions. And for example, how do you measure the pandemic? How do you measure it across the whole planet? I mean, there's so much comparison going on about systems of government. And this relates to the midterm, right? In terms of the question, is the American system obsolete? That's a very broad, general, weird kind of a statement. Well, not weird, but it basically implies this element of comparison with other countries, right? So if you compare, 1 million deaths in the U.S. And you compare with China, China's had no more than several thousand total deaths. They claim. I mean, there's the New York Times highlighted today. I was just reading about how the government, the authoritarian communist government of China, is pointing to its comparatively successful COVID-19 response to highlight or appeal domestically to its people and also, I think, internationally. And there's some question about whether or not the statistics are accurate. And then put the whole issue of statistics, like the Americans evidently, if somebody dies from a heart attack and they're infected with COVID, the Americans will say that person died of COVID. in the statistics.
Mhm.
Even though we don't know if they died because of the COVID, the fact that they had a heart attack while they had COVID, the Americans will include that COVID infection. That's what I thought I read just today.
Mhm.
Whereas the Chinese won't do that. They do not include, if it's not obvious that COVID caused pneumonia that led to death, they're not going to say COVID caused the death, even if the person was infected.
Mhm.
And so there was this, and there's been ongoing discussion for months about looking at general patterns in terms of averages of death rates in that society, whether it be South Africa or Turkey or Poland or the United States or China, and averaging out the average death rates, I guess compensating for increase or decrease in or population size, and then seeing how much the death rate has increased overall during the pandemic. And that they say that's the total deaths, and that includes the deaths that come from the pandemic when people, for example, are not getting medical treatment because they go to a hospital and they've got a problem and they can't get into the hospital because the hospital is overwhelmed with COVID patients. Mm-hmm. So that and if you do that, that's a more accurate reflection of the deaths caused by the pandemic. So and of course, then it becomes that's one perspective. Another perspective, for example, is going on today. India is the Indian government is upset with the World Health Organization because the World Health Organization is project through their modeling, their epidemic statistical mathematical models. They're saying that the death rate in India is at least, I don't know, they're saying like double what the official Indian government claimed. And why is India so? And India refuses to accept it. And they're vetoing, or they're trying to stop the World Health Organization from issuing its COVID World Global Report. Mm-hmm. So why is India so upset about it? Because it's about nationalism. They appear poor, they appear backward, they appear underdeveloped, and that's how nations and their perceived cultural level is judged in the beginning 21st century. So in terms of your level of economic and technological development. And the pandemic, and of course the Chinese are all into this, right? They say, yeah, and look what we did. We have less than 6,000 or 7,000 total deaths for a country that's 20% of the world's population. And so is the US are American political institutions obsolete? When you say 1 million COVID deaths, is that evidence that America's system is fundamentally can be judged? If you want to judge it, that's a separate, I'm not saying it's something you necessarily want to do as a political scientist, but some political philosophers might say, because there is a focus in political science and political philosophy, including how to do epistemology, like the science of political science, how do you gather political knowledge? But there's also what we call normative political philosophy, which is like living the good life. How do you create a good society? What's a bad society, therefore? So I guess that would be part of a political science paper. You could still say, yeah, the U.S. system is somehow, you can make an argument that this is an evidence the U.S. political system is somehow, and by some normative good or bad criteria, is worse than it should be, is deficient in ways that it should not be, that should be corrected. Now, how you correct that, that's a topic I think I mentioned here. You might point out that, yeah, the U.S. system is a problem. So how do you fix it? And you have to fix it, in terms of, I guess, and this is again going back to this normative political philosophy. I mean, there's a long tradition in political normative political philosophy, not just the progressive, universalistic human rights advocacy, but also conservative political philosophy. And so, in normative political philosophy, some of the leading conservative theorists that are really emphasized include, of course, like we talked about in the beginning of the semester, Thomas Hobbes. I mean, Thomas Hobbes has a pretty. I think conservative normative political philosophers, they tend to have a more pessimistic view of human nature, and so Hobbes has a more pessimistic view about the nature of human beings than, say, John Locke, who came around, several decades later. But perhaps the most famous one we don't talk about in class is Thomas Burke. And Thomas Burke was a political philosopher of the late 18th century. And he spent a lot of his time criticizing the French Revolution. Like the French Revolution, the French revolutionaries taking to power, and they had these big dreams, they developed these big dreams of totally reforming French society. And the result, but in fact, the outcome of the French Revolution included intense polarization, the first genocidal fighting we started seeing in modern politics. There was an uprising by conservative monarchist reaction in the Vendée region, and the revolutionary government sent the revolutionary army in, and like 300,000 people were slaughtered. And that's this is going on like Ukraine now. This kind of genocidal violence we started to see in modern form, not like in the 30 Years War, but in modern form, during the French Revolution. And so the point is, if you're going to reform the U.S., the point that did I say Thomas Burke? Is it Thomas Burke? I think it's Thomas Burke. The point that he made, you have to be careful in terms of trying to make changes in society. And you have to definitely, the point I'm trying to make is that if you're going to make changes in society, you got to work with what the Americans have yeah. Not that guy, but yeah.
But yeah, I know which one.
Yeah, and yeah, I just don't. I wonder if I got his name right. I can't remember if I got his. Okay, but okay. So, but the point is you have to work with what the American political system, the way what in terms of what exists, right? So I guess maybe I should probably share the screen if I'm going to record this here. So and so how would you make the American political institutions less deficient, or modernize them, or reform them?
I guess it was difficult with the question because obsolete is it's a very strong word.
Yeah.
So to say. So I kind of understood it, and I argued in a way that they're deficient. So I kind of argued more in the way that, okay, they're deficient, or as you said, they're worse than they should be in relation, for example, to the millions that caused, even though they are so technologically advanced or more technologically advanced compared to other countries. So yeah, I kind of went in the more they're worse than they should be direction, because obsolete is such a.
Well, if you're gonna, you provoke a lot of thought in my head, and and I appreciate it, because one of the reasons I like having these meetings, because I have to talk and I have to think through what I'm trying to. I have to think through what's going on in my head, so I have to think through it. This notion, because there is this modernization and development perspective in political science. It's very judgmental. Like, yeah, how can we make American institutions more modern? You mean America is not it's a developing country like India? Oh my gosh! And this provokes emotion, and this is nationalism, and that relates to this kind of a question also. Because to take another example, like an American libertarian, classical. First off, let me just conclude this point. They say, well, you got to use the American amendment process for the Constitution. It's only been done like 17 times successfully. I mean, the first 10 amendments, they were part of the Bill of Rights that was adopted at the same time as the rest of the Constitution. So that was all set. And at first, there were like 2 other amendments that were like technical corrections to problems in the Constitution. So there's only been 15 substantive changes in terms of amendments. About 15, I think, amendments that have been done to the U.S. Constitution 240 years. And so it's difficult. And 3 of those amendments were adopted after the Civil War. They're called the Civil War Amendments. The 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, 14th Amendment that was supposed to promise or guarantee due process of law and a fair trial to everybody, and everybody be treated fairly under the law, and the 15th Amendment, which required everybody born in the United States is automatically a citizen. So, and that happened after a war that the North won, but it was still a war that killed 700,000 people, which began to show the impact of the Industrial Revolution on war, which the Europeans would really see in World War I. And then and a constitution, you should say a constitution is supposed to, ideally, it's supposed to be the way by which this community of people that live in these boundaries of this state, this country, they agree that they're going to debate and decide on questions, including resolve their disputes without killing each other. And the US Constitution was written 240 years ago by people who are very much aware of the conflicts between North and South over slavery. It's reflected in the content of the Constitution. And so they knew this was a problem. This was an issue. But the Constitution didn't prevent the Civil War. So 89 years later, there finally was a war over this issue. And the Constitution was not able, the functioning of the institutions was not able to prevent the South from separating and the North from going to war to stop them from separating. And this raises all sorts of interesting questions, because this is more of a topic like in my American history class. But we talked about how, and it's mentioned at the beginning of the semester, how Americans are taught that the Constitution is just like this holy document, like the Bible. They view it with reverence, and it was all a product of bargaining, political bargaining. And this wonderful Constitution didn't prevent the Civil War from happening, and now we have these other. You can say there are problems, but even if you say, like somebody even pointing to, first off, just to conclude, I make sure I finish. To amend the Constitution, you have to have a proposed amendment adopted by both houses of Congress. The president can't veto it. And then it's got to be approved by 3/4 of the states. So 38 states have to approve it before the amendment is adopted. So it's usually adopted in terms of the state's own legislature government system. They adopt it. And so it's difficult to do that. And the most perhaps the most substantive case or effort to do that was the if I can find it here, the Equal Rights Amendment, right? This was a proposal during the put forth for a long time, but then it got really lots of political support during in the 70s with the women's movement. The women's, what we used to call when I was a kid, the women's liberation movement, women's lib. Women's lib was always the short term we always used for women's liberation. And this didn't get passed. It came close, but it didn't get the 38 states necessary for it to be adopted. And it didn't pass because there was a reaction against it by conservative, populists who argued that, oh, it would mean women are going to be drafted in the military. Basically, they were afraid that this is going to basically make it easier to change American policy in ways that threatened these people's understanding of what is a good American society, including, for example, all sorts of. But the point is that you can say it's a very simple statement. All it states is this, right? That shall be equality in the law. It shall not be a date on the account of sex. Congress will have to enforce the law, and the amendment will take. So this is basically it. And this couldn't get passed. So after the Donald Trump experience, people were saying, "Well, Donald Trump came into office, and they supposedly claimed that Donald Trump was dangerous." And so how did he get elected? Well, Hillary Clinton got almost 3 million votes more than him, individual votes, but she still lost because of the Electoral College. So we need to reform the Electoral College. And so that's been going on for a long time. I mean, when Bill Clinton, he didn't get a majority of the votes. When he became president in 1992, he got more votes than anybody else, individual and won the Electoral College, but he didn't get over 50%. And then in 2000, Al Gore got 500,000 more votes than George W. Bush, but George W. Bush still won the presidency because of the Electoral College. So there's also been all sorts of talk about. We've got to change the Electoral College. We have to do something to change the American political system so that the president is determined by the outcome of the popular vote. And again, I mean, that's always, but even that, after Trump, after what happened on January 6, 2001, there's just not going anywhere. There's not been a constitutional move, a serious constitutional move to propose to change the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. There has been efforts over the last more than 20 years to not reform the Electoral College, but basically the proposal, and this has been passed by a number of states, that to say that the colleges, the states' Electoral College electors, the people that vote, the Electoral College will go for each state, which is determined. So Ohio, I think, has 16 electoral college, 18 electoral college votes, because that's 2 senators and 16 representatives. So 2 plus 16 is 18. So Ohio has 18 electoral college votes. So Ohio's electoral college votes will be assigned according to Ohio law. This is Ohio law, according to the candidate that wins the most popular vote around the whole country, not just in Ohio.
Okay.
And some people said if more than half of the electoral college total states that have electoral college votes pass that law, that's done. It works because the electoral college doesn't have to be abolished through the amendment process of the Constitution. It can stay in place, but each state has to pass this law. And once a majority of 270 total electoral college, well, once states with a total of 270 electoral college votes pass such state law at the state level in Ohio and California, New York, whatever, then voila, it's fixed.
Okay.
But there's been some question, and that has gotten some number of states have passed that, but they say it only happened. They put it in their respective law of Ohio and Virginia and Texas that this will come into effect when the majority, like I just said, when states representing a majority of electoral college votes pass adopted. And then, but there's some question about whether or not it will be accepted by the Supreme Court. That it will be challenged in court, and that so it's not even certain it will be that it will be accepted. Okay, but I guess. But to get to the more interesting or more problematic issue, well, let me ask you in the time we're in, do you have any questions?
Yeah,
okay.
So because I didn't understand there was one part that we crossed out entirely.
Oh yeah, just as a suggestion about how you might want to keep under the 500 word limit, like do you really need all of this here? Do you need this? I mean, I don't know if you really need that introductory statements. You just want to make your truth claim, your truth statement, and then prove it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if this is introductory stuff here,
yeah, sure. That
I mean, this is sound like, repeating. I mean, some of this in terms of what you might want to cut out to get to the 500 word limit, and keep in mind if you cut that out, some of this. Make sure you use inside information for these 3 different chapters from chapters 1 through 7. Okay, but
there's one part about it starts with federalism, where I kind of referred back to the 10th Amendment that delegates powers to the
states. Yeah,
to the states,
and
you cross that out completely. Is it because it's wrong or not necessary to the point? Because I think the main point.
Oh, you want to keep that? Okay, yeah, you can do whatever you want. I mean, I just make a suggestion. You can, if you want to keep that, you're certainly welcome to keep it. I mean, I just maybe I read it a little bit too quickly. I'd have to go back and read. I can't remember what was going through my head at the time.
Because especially the last sentence, it's about the lack of resources. So that's kind of because the state delegates those power. The government delegates those powers to the states, but does not give them the resources to actually fulfill the powers that it was. So I thought.
Well, that's a good point. Okay. All right. Okay, that's interesting.
So that, I mean, maybe not obsolete, but maybe that is something that you have to.
Well, I mean, that's an important point that, and just in terms of I was moving to the next point is that, for example, this issue about the 1 million people dying, this might be for intense American nationalists who are libertarian conservative types, they would say this number doesn't mean the American system is worse or bad. It's, why they would say something like this, that the price of freedom, the cost of freedom, that means you have to make difficult choices. And we Americans, they would say, we love freedom. And we don't want a big, strong central government to be involved in our daily life so much. We certainly don't want the coronavirus to be used as an opportunity to expand socialism. Oh, socialism. We want to be like the communists. We want to be like communist China. The fact that China, first, the Chinese were probably lying, but we don't want to live like, ants in an ant colony controlled by the Communist Party. We love freedom. And we will pay that price of our freedom. And this, and so they would deny that this is somehow evidence the American system is quote unquote backward or obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
And they get even, and this pandemic is a new episode of this, but they've been saying this for the longest time. Like, for example, the point I covered in class, like the gun regulation advocates point out that 54,000 people died by gun violence in the United States since Joe Biden became president 14, 15 months ago. And these libertarian, conservative, typically Republican Party voters, they say, we don't care because we love freedom. And the mark of a true freedom is that we Americans, as citizens, have the right to keep and bear arms according to the Second Amendment of the US Constitution as we interpret that. And that's how we are, that we are true, we have true freedom. And this becomes complicated because these are code words that people deny they're even speaking in code. Some people say, what's going on in people's thinking? Why are they so hung up with guns? Is it because they're afraid of crime? Are they afraid of blacks? It's like, if we don't have our guns, the blacks are going to come after us, or the foreigners, or there might be elements of that. But like, for example, these Republican, they even prevented the US Congress from spending money on research, on social science research to investigate the causes of gun violence, because they deny that it's really a serious problem, because they don't want the government involved in control. They're afraid of the government engaged in what they call social engineering, that we're going to replace the ministers and the priests and the church and the Bible with the new civic religion of social scientists, with their theories and their desire to attack traditional American values, like they talk about in Poland, right, with the Law and Justice Party. That the European Union is trying to change our values according to some images that these high and mighty secular aristocrats in Brussels, in terms of, they have an image of how Poland should be or how America should be, if we're talking about what they call secular humanists, who mock religion and mock belief in God and Jesus. And they get really emotional about this. And we talked about that, we showed some of that in class. So this issue about whether or not people are, the American political system's obsolete is problematic, a question, and it was meant to be provocative. And but if you're going to be a normative political theorist, or you're going to be, or even an empirical theorist, that you could say that, like, certainly one of the functions of a government, according to Thomas Hobbes, is to provide order. And when you have 54,000 people dying from gun violence, and you have, America, like 2% of the adult population is imprisoned. Nobody else has that. 2% out of every 100 adults is in prison in the United States. Isn't that an indicator that there's something wrong? And the libertarians, no, because they're bad people. They're scum. That's why they're in prison. They're bad. They can't handle freedom. And so, but I think you can make an argument that if a constitution cannot successfully move a community to be able to come to decisions on how to address challenges in such a way that are building, that it's going to generate more and more, the results will be more and more polarization, more and more inequality, and more polarization among different groups in society that hate each other. And that's going to potentially become dangerous, like what produces civil wars, right? And that, you could say, that's definitely a judgment on a constitution, on a political system that is still normative, but it's still fundamentally assumed that basically, one of the functions of a government is to keep order, so that people don't kill each other in resolving their disputes. So they use deadly force against each other. That we go, there's a police, there's courts that we accept. And you could point to all of this evidence that this might be a judgment that basically the American system is and it's not just me. I mean, this is a book that's, this is the 7th edition. This is from 2013, so this is 9 years old. They make this point, the same points I'm making here. So this is a discussion, and this is, Sage Public, this is a famous social science publisher, but how to fix the problem, this is before Trump gets elected. This is, is an important question. And I'm not certain that there's really, certainly the Chinese are saying, yeah, look at these Americans. They have 350 million weapons. They've every like just last week, there were like 3 or 4 mass shootings in the United States. Somebody took the, even in the schools, they can't stop kids bringing guns to schools and shooting other kids. What kind of model is this for China and the rest of the world? Not to mention the pandemic response. And people respond different ways. Joe Biden makes these points, and trying to persuade and appeal to people to support his policy proposals. But other people say, well, the response is, we don't care. We shouldn't care about what's going on in China. Let's get out of China. Let's get out of NATO. Let's let the Europeans take care of Europe. That's what Donald Trump was saying, right? And we live our way the way we live, and we don't have to. We shouldn't have to compare ourselves with anybody else. And typically, the kind of people that make those arguments are conservative white people or people that want to become white people, because there are some hardline right-wing African-American people that represent this desire, this desperate desire to assimilate into the core group. Donald Trump made significant inroads in getting Blacks and Hispanics to vote for him in 2020. So there are these pressures to assimilate. Hispanic people, they want to become white. Maybe they will be. But like I told you, 120 years ago, Poles, Italians, they were not considered white in the United States. East Europeans, Southern Europeans, they were not considered white. Now, voila, they are, right? Maybe the same will happen to Hispanic Americans. Maybe it'll happen to Black. I don't know if it'll happen to Blacks. Anyway. Yeah, so, okay, thank you for pointing that out. I see what you're doing there. But I guess in terms of what I'm trying to explain, this suspicion with the big, powerful central government, that's the 10th Amendment's purpose. We're not going to allow the central government to become big and powerful. But now this was written 240 years ago. Now we're here in 2022. We got pandemics. We've got global financial crises. We've got world wars. How can you, make it so difficult for the central government to, and of course, it was the central government that had to intervene to enforce the rights of Black people in the South during the Jim Crow civil laws to be broken down after the Second World War. Right? Yeah, it was, and that's been a resentment of these reactionary populists saying they've never really. A lot of them have never really accepted this notion that the Supreme Court, representing the federal authority, will intervene to make abortion services legal. They're even talking about Griswold versus Connecticut was another U.S. Supreme Court decision in the 1960s that made birth control, access to birth control pills and devices legal. That they shouldn't have done that. That this is, and they're still on they're even upset about that. Not to mention abortion from Roe versus Wade in 1973. But these are all developments that reinforced and pushed further the power of the central government to override these parochial, local traditions that people think are, ethical and moral. Like, you shouldn't kill unborn babies, as they phrase it. So, any other questions?
No.
Okay, so let me just go ahead and send this to you here. And but it's just, just watching the news, and it's Maya, right? Yeah, yes. But what's been going on with the pandemic and ever since, and just being amazed by how much, during, I'm 59, so, I grew up during the Cold War, and when I watched the Cold War when it ended, and, this belief that somehow the world is fundamentally changed in terms of its political behavior, and that somehow, and then you see these. They're even attacking Roe versus Wade and Griswold versus Connecticut, or genocide and genocidal violence in Ukraine. That this is never supposed to happen again, and it's happening again in the same place where it happened 80 years ago. I guess it makes me more of a concern, like a realist, like Hans Morgenthau, that, yeah, we have new technologies. We go from bows and arrows and spears to AK-47s and nuclear weapons and tanks, but we're still killing animals with big overdeveloped cerebrums. Wow. So, okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I will try to.
So you here for you here half a year or a whole year?
Just half a year.
And you're coming from German school?
Yeah, I'm from Hochschule Rhein-Waal, it's like in close to the Dutch border. It's a small city called.
Are you the first student from that school to come here?
No, there was a
Thomas?
I don't know. There was another guy last semester, Mike.
Okay, I didn't have him, but I had another German student. I think he had a Slavic last name, but he was German. I can't remember his name. Thomas.
I mean, I don't know if they took there was one last year, it was Mike, and then the year before there was Jean-Paul Janata.
No, I didn't have him. But there was another student, he was from a new university that was kind of progressive, and he did his master's research here also. He got his master's thesis, but I can't remember his name. His name is because I still get an email from him every once in a while, but in terms of Thomas, I'll come up here somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking for his name here. But you don't know a guy named Thomas, so it doesn't really matter what his name is. But
no, but it could be like my university is also kind of smaller. It was founded like 10 years ago. Something incorporates a lot of new study programs, like international relations is a typical master degree, and they're one of the, I guess, 5 universities in Germany that offer this a bachelor's degree.
In what?
Sorry?
Bachelor's degree in what field? I'm sorry.
International relations.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So yeah, they have a lot of new fields. And,
yeah.
Might be that he's from that university. I cannot.
Almost. I thought I had his thesis here, but oh yeah, is that it? No, that's it.
Was he a master's student when
No, he was here during the pandemic. Well, he did his master's research during the pandemic, and I saw him. But I just don't see it here right now. He was buried somewhere, but yeah, his first name is Thomas. I don't really talk to people about other people, but if I use people's names, I don't learn them very well because. But yeah, so okay, well, all right. So I'll send you the link to the recording. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll try to incorporate the changes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Bye.
Have a nice day.
Okay.